Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing We All Die Naked by James Blish. This was a Hugo finalist in the year 1970 for Best Novella, and I read this book in a collection called 3 for Tomorrow, which includes 3 novellas, also including works by Robert Silverberg and Roger Zelazny. I only read the work in here though by James Blish, We All Die Naked, which is the third and final novella in this collection, and that is the only one I'm going to be reviewing in this video. So while I did have some trouble finding We All Die Naked, we can tell from this book that this was very popular in the 1970s. It still has its original 1970 library checkout record, and you can see all those stamps from the 70s and 80s. So this book was a finalist and was an excellent piece of work, and we can tell that it was quite popular in the 1970s from this checkout thing. I love when I can see these little records of the past in these books. I think these are so fun. So I'm going to be talking about the plot of this book, what you can expect when you get this book, as well as some thoughts that I had while reading this book, because I feel like I made a lot of connections to the real world, as we can always do when we read good sci-fi and good fantasy. So let's dive in and talk about the plot. One thing that I really appreciate about novellas is an author has to do a lot of world building and convey a plot in a very, very small number of words, comparatively to, say, a novel or a full-length series that a sci-fi or fantasy author could write. So Blish jumps right in, and we find ourselves on Earth in the far future. We are actually following an individual whose full name is Alexi Aub Kehoe Salvia Sun Moon Lake Stewart San D, who goes by the name Alex, thankfully for the rest of the novella, and he inhabits the same Earth that we live on physically, but a very, very different environment. So humans have begun producing a lot of waste. Well, they were producing a lot of waste in the 1960s and 70s, and we still do to this day. In the book We All Die Naked, the waste has gotten out of control and humans were not able to manage it. So instead of coming up with solutions to deal with all the waste that we produce, humans just started letting the litter pile up, essentially, because there were no good options. The attempts to break it down or put it somewhere just led to all sorts of other environmental disasters, and now things have kind of compiled to create a real problem. The Earth is getting really hot. We have an increase in seismic activity. There was melting of the ice caps, which led to a massive increase in water level. We have the air being incredibly carcinogenic to the point where people you hear are required to wear masks at any time being outside, but also implied in the book is that cancer is quite common to get, sadly, due to the quality of the air around them. And we find Alex working as a government employee, essentially, in New York City. But this New York City is quite different, as you can imagine, to the New York City you and I might know, because most of what was New York City to us is now underwater. Transportation is done by canoe, or what used to be like the public bus or subway system is now called barges, and they're implied to be just literal barges, which are public transportation. Don't worry, Times Square is still a mess, and there's traffic control on the water. There's buildings that we haven't really raised up. Instead, things are just slowly underwater. At one point during this novel, Alex goes and visits an individual who is renting on the 5th floor, which is actually the first habitable floor on a building, because everything up to that point is underwater. Alex is part of a department whose job it is to try to keep the trash and the waste and the pollution problem under control as best that he can. And he is working with basically a dying planet, trying to keep everything under control the best that he can. You do get the sense that maybe he didn't cause all these problems, but he's trying to prevent these problems from getting worse and trying to mitigate what he can in his role. He goes at the very beginning of this novella, plots move fast in novellas, he goes to a meeting with someone who it's implied is his political rival, and they begin to talk because they're trying to work out whether or not Alex's department is going to go on strike, when this politician reveals some sobering news that Alex had actually heard previously while hanging out with some friends, but he dismissed. And that is that Earth has actually reached its limit. Humans have done too much to the Earth, and the Earth is rejecting. There's going to be an increase in polar melting. There's going to be an increase in, some of the poles have melted, but there's going to be more increases in that. It's going to become unbearably hot. There's going to be an increase in volcanism, and humanity is going to die off. But the politician offers a secret. A select number of people, I think it's like tens of thousands or maybe just thousands of people are going to be shipped off to the moon because there's the ability to travel to the moon, and there's going to be an attempt to restart humanity on the moon because very, very soon Earth is no longer going to be habitable for humans. And this timeline is not within like the next 20 or 30 years, it's within a matter of not even days. It's now. We've crossed that point, and Earth is now at its limit, and it's rejecting human life and basically tearing itself apart. So the politician says we have 10 tickets. You can bring 6 women and 3 men, and then you're taking the final ticket. And that's your allotment. And we're going to try again from the moon, and we have to decide basically immediately what we're doing. And this, of course, kicks off a huge number of questions. If your Earth is falling apart, do you take your chances? Do you just sit down and accept death on Earth? Or do you try to go to the moon with very little plan to try to restart from there? How do you pick? How do you pick among people that you know to give these tickets to? And how does a bureaucracy keep that quiet from everybody while they're trying to ship some people off to the moon? How do you overcome the guilt that comes with picking someone to live or die, but also the self-preservation instinct that humans tend to have for good reason? So I think that the situation set up leads to a lot of interesting questions and decisions along the way. And I think there's a big question, which is when you're out of options, when Earth ceases to be an option, basically, what do you do and how can you act with dignity? Because Alex didn't put the Earth in this situation, but now he's having to make choices for his life in the vacuum of this situation that has come up. So that is the plot as put forward in We All Die Naked by James Blish. So, as always, I think it's high quality writing. I enjoyed it. I had a great time reading it. I think I'm a little biased when I read these Hugo Award winners or finalists in these categories because I'm naturally reading kind of the cream of the crop every single year. I remarked at one point that I'm not reading a lot of bad novellas because I'm reading these Hugo Award winners and finalists, and that makes sense. Most of these winners and finalists will probably have stood the test of time, at least to a certain extent, because they were at one point nominated for a very prestigious award. So it was a good book, but I kind of expected it to be an enjoyable read. It's about 50 pages. I read it over the course of a 1-hour lunch break, actually. So it was a great, interesting, maybe a little dark way to spend an afternoon in my office, but I did what I had to do. So with the quality and my interest being set aside, I really like the author, and I mentioned this before, taking the challenge of having to present a plot in so few words, and I think he did a really good job of it. And I like also the content of this entire anthology, even though I didn't read it, and I'll explain why. So this was put together by Arthur C. Clarke, and there was a forward section that I did read because I felt like it might be necessary, and the title does kind of imply it, 3 for Tomorrow. They seem to be a collection of novellas that deal with what Earth might look like in the future if we don't address problems now. And I wanted to read the first paragraph of the forward because I felt like it was relevant to explain what Clarke, I think, was getting for in collecting these novellas. With increasing technology goes increasing vulnerability. The more man conquers nature, the more prone he becomes to artificial catastrophe, which is the whole setup in We All Die Naked. The last few years have brought a series of previews: the Torrey Canyon oil tanker and the Santa Barbara oil slick, the blackout of the northeastern United States, the thalidomide disaster, the tobacco and automobile industries, and then he trails off. What I think is really interesting is this advancement of human history where there's always new disasters. There's always, like, just looking at this, and I don't know when things happen, maybe this sounds bad, but had the Exxon Valdez oil spill happened yet? And of course we've had, what is it, Deepwater Horizons? I hope I'm saying these correctly. Those are 2 big disasters that have occurred. Thalidomide at this point, I feel like, at least to me, seems very far off in the distant, but that was a recent issue since then. We've gone through a lot of additional problems that have come about since this book was written, but he's kind of putting us in the scene. What was life like in the 1960s, and what were recent current things that were occurring that seemed or that were artificial catastrophes? So things that we cause ourselves and brought them in to being. I also thought, and I looked it up, Arthur C. Clarke died in the late 2000s, 2008 I think it was, and he wrote this very interesting part of the forward too. The most terrifying prospects are those which involve psychological, not only technological factors. And I think the psychological factor comes into play in this We All Die Naked because you know the earth is falling apart. But remember the mad bomber of the New York subway? Think of all the airliners that have been destroyed by explosives in the baggage compartment. And this is telling. There are many more attempts at aerial sabotage than the public ever hears about. Now, Clark would have seen what happened in 2001, so this is what I mean when I kind of say the disasters do keep coming. And, well, I am personally an optimist. It is kind of hard to read this beginning and see, this is not the first time humans have faced this. And this whole collection seems to be a continuation, or novels that take the continuation of an idea on what do we do if we don't learn from our mistakes. Because I don't think it's possible for humans to stop making mistakes. I mean, when you make a mistake, people say like, oh, you're just human. We're going to make mistakes as individuals and as a whole group. But I think the important thing is to learn from the mistake and not just as it happened in We All Die Naked, obviously a fictional scenario, just letting things build up until the point where we do something quite catastrophic to either the planet we live on or ourselves or other species. So I felt like the foreword is very relevant. If you do get this 3 for tomorrow, definitely read the foreword because I think that was quite telling. It also reminded me, slightly unrelated, but also very telling. I was on a trip and I was visiting Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. It's where, if you're an American, you know the whole Phil sees the shadow predict winter thing that happens every year. But there's a memorial in that town that was dedicated in, I believe, the 1920s or 30s, and it said it was by some women's society. It's right there next to where Phil lives in the library if you have a chance to visit, and it says something about dedicated in memory of those who lost their lives in the wars. And it's the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, I believe the Spanish-American War, and what they're calling the Great War. Of course, the irony of this is not knowing there's another war on the horizon with World War II coming up that wasn't even happening when they put this memorial in. So this is kind of also, it brought up that memory when I saw the foreword for this book and thought, oh, humanity does keep things keep happening. Things do keep happening. But overall, I did enjoy We All Die Naked. I thought that the plot and the world building was really well done in such a short space, and the plot kept moving. Sometimes I feel like in novellas you could probably run into it, I'm imagining here, although I don't really think I've read too many bad novellas, there is definitely the danger of leaving the plot till too late in the novella and then being unable to capitalize on all your space, or maybe rushing into it too much and not building the world. But Blish does a really good job balancing both of them in this book, and I think if you're interested in hearing about maybe a potential future for humanity or something that Blish imagined happening to humans in the future, definitely check out We All Die Naked, because I thought this was a very interesting book and I had a very interesting lunch hour reading it. If you have read this book or have any thoughts on this novella, please put your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. I love to receive them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.